Ensuring the inclusion of LGBTQIA plus women in effective peace building.
My name is Sophie. I work in Here and I as a Senior Policy Development Officer.
Reflecting back, what has been the impact of the conflict and peace process on LGBTQIA plus women's rights?
So, LGBTQIA plus women historically have not had much opportunity to be part of public life. The peace process provided a new opportunity for women and including LGBTQIA plus women to have more of a voice in public life. So one of the ways that this came to fruition was through the Lesbian Advocacy Services Initiative, which was set up in 1999. And that was a group of queer women who decided that there needed to be more support and advocacy for, at that time, lesbian and bisexual women. And as Here and I then evolved in 2012, we have now become an LGBTQIA plus women's organisation, and particularly advocating as well for trans women who in today's society face disproportionate challenges being part of the LGBTQIA plus community and in women's spaces as well. Um, I think LGBTQIA plus women during the conflict are a really interesting group to look at. During the conflict, when queer people met up in activist circles, in bars, in peer support groups, um, an LGBTQIA plus identity almost was something that people could come together and put aside other differences around, coming together around values of love and inclusion and diversity. And that often superseded, especially during the peace process, other more national identities that people had. And so for that reason, I think LGBTQIA plus women and the community as a whole are a great example of how unity can come across in times of division through love and respect for one another. Um, I also think we're an interesting group to study when I look at, for example, how we had to self-govern during that period. Obviously, I wasn't alive during that peace process time, but after speaking to other LGBTQIA plus women who have been involved in setting up the Lesbian Advocacy Services Initiative, there probably wasn't a lot of opportunity to seek support from traditional avenues like the police. And so LGBT communities had to be really good at governing themselves, and that's something that we continue to do today through peer support, and advocate for LGBT people to have in-house services, because often as a community it's important to feel like you're understood, and that isn't always the case within mainstream services.
How can we ensure that LGBTQIA plus women's voices and experiences are included in policy and decision making?
Well, firstly, I think if we look at LGBTQIA plus women's involvement in policy and peace building today, we don't really see much evidence or examples of that. We suffer from a lack of role models in public life. Um, I don't think there's any out LGBTQIA plus MLAs in our assembly, for example. Um, Women's representation isn't where it needs to be either. There's still only 38% of the assembly that are women. Um, so representation as it stands in public life isn't really where it needs to be. I think one of the ways that we continue to encourage that and encourage more LGBTQIA plus women into positions of leadership is through their experience in school and education. And one of the fundamentals of that is really high quality, comprehensive relationships and sex education that empowers more young queer women around their identities, but also teaching about LGBTQIA plus pioneers in history and literature, in science. Too often, those queer icons or pioneers are talked about, it's mostly men that we hear of, and so for so long, LGBT women haven't really been visible in our curriculum, but also in wider public life. Now that is changing. Another way that I think that we need to encourage more LGBT women into public policy, into decision making positions, is through making women's spaces really inclusive. And that's something that the Northern Ireland women's sector does really well currently, and it's something that other women's spaces should strive to be, and that's as inclusive as possible. And we as an organisation, as Here and I, are always looking to work with more organisations through training around sexual orientation and gender identity to empower more people to be comfortable in their own skin, and also to encourage more women into leadership positions as well.
Looking forward, what is needed next in terms of gender equality and LGBTQIA plus human rights?
So gender equality and LGBTQIA plus rights are so interlinked. We have seen a high demand from the women's sector and the LGBT sector, high lobbying efforts to push through a gender equality strategy and an LGBTQIA plus strategy. Those strategies are now in the back burner, but they very much need to be on the front of our lobbying efforts, and front of the executive's agenda and the Department for Communities agenda. We need those strategies working in tandem. We've been promised an LGBT strategy since 2007, and we are now in 2024, nearly 2025, and what delivery has the executive brought about for our community? And that's very little. Some of the issues that are really important in terms of human rights moving forward are hate crime legislation, so improving hate crime legislation to ensure that the whole of the LGBTQIA plus community is protected within law, so including transgender identity as a protected characteristic within hate crime legislation is a key priority. And we also need high quality, comprehensive relationships and sexuality education in schools that's inclusive of LGBTQIA plus identities, so more young people feel safe, accepted, and knowledgeable in school to be able to make informed choices. Unfortunately, in this part of the world, conversion practices that seek to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity are still legal, and we desperately need a ban on conversion practices within this mandate. And there's a private members bill coming through the Assembly at the minute, and we would encourage as many people to get behind our campaign to ban conversion practices in this region. As well, we need more access to gender affirming care, and we need to ensure that more trans young people have access to gender affirming care, because currently the state of trans healthcare services in this region is abysmal. It's not functioning, and for trans young people we need more services, and for trans adults as well. And more commonly, we're seeing in today's society, which is an absolutely vital human rights concern, is protections for LGBTQIA plus asylum seekers and refugees. We are committed as an organisation to working with partner organisations who are promoting integration into communities, but it is absolutely vital that we as a sector take action on protecting refugees and asylum seekers in our communities, in our societies, and we would encourage the executive to do the same.